is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 515. I'm one of your cruising dudes. My name is Marshall. My other cool dude is Luis Scott-Vargas from Denver, Colorado. God, that thing just threw me off, Luis.
Yeah, that was not your finest intro.
That's stupid music. Every time you do it, I'm like, what the hell is happening? You'd think I'd get used to it, but I have not yet.
Well, I mean, I think our podcast is comprised of two cool dudes, so really hard to let that opportunity slip by us.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how people describe us.
Yeah, that's true.
But potentially, we're on our way to two cruising dudes or cool dudes or whatever. So yeah, this week on the show, we've got a really fun one lined up, Luis. The original plan was to do the sealed episode for Throne of Eldraine. But neither you nor I had enough time to jam enough sealed, I should say, to be able to have great opinions on it. So instead, we're doing a show that I've actually had kind of on the back burner for a while. And then next week, I believe, we should be able to do the sealed show next week. That means.
Well, let me just ask you this, Marshall. Is it genius or grifter to do what is essentially a full sign-off show instead of limited content?
Yes, and that is, in fact, the question that we are going to be answering today, because today, the whole show are genius or grifters. We're going to be doing all genius or grifters submitted by you, and this is going to be really fun. And interestingly, I thought it was just going to be for fun, but then when I started going through them and parsing them and getting them into the notes, I noticed there's actually a lot of lessons, limited lessons, tournament lessons, and stuff to be learned from these as well. So I think you'll actually get something useful out of it, and it should be really fun. So we're going to be doing all genius or grifters today. Before we get into all that, though, I got to mention our sponsor. That's channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. Big announcement from CFB last week, Luis.
Yeah, we announced Team Channel Fireball, Team CFB, and it's a team, esports team comprised of myself, William Jensen, Reed Duke, Gabby Sparts, Martin Juza, Andrea Mangucci, and last but definitely not least, Sho. Sho is a recent addition to kind of Magic. He is a really well known Hearthstone streamer, StarCraft 2 competitor, and he switched over to Magic Arena, about a year ago, a little more than that, and it's been awesome. So really, really glad that he's joined us as well. So this esports team it's funny because CFB kind of already had an esports team in the sense that our team for the last 10 years has done a lot of the same functions, but this is us kind of moving forward, getting with the times and, with the age of digital Magic. So I'm actually really excited for it. I think it's going to be really sweet. Yeah,
it is awesome. Where can people find out more about it or follow along if they're interested?
So you can go to teamcfb.com. That's got, all our player profiles and, the team roster and all that. And, you can also go to channelfireball.com because the team's, making content for Channel Fireball. We've actually seen some new pieces of content, including, dare I say, a competing podcast, that started last week.
I don't know if I'd call it competitive just yet. But,
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, Mashi is involved, so you don't want to go too deep there.
Poor Mashi. He's not even here to defend himself. My God. But yeah, so make sure you check all that out over at Channel Fireball. And while you're there, Luis mentioned awesome free content right on the front page of the site by some of the best players, content producers, etc. in Magic. Show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. Many of these genius or grifters came from a post that I made on the Patreon last week, as well as I also got a bunch of these from email because people will send us genius or grifters, and I have a thing that I saved them in and went back actually a few years on some of these to grab them. But anyway, that's just one of the cool perks that you get by being a patron is you can have a direct line to Luis and I. There's messages on there, and also I'll put up posts with questions for guests that we have on, or for the Q&A shows that we love, or for something special like this, like a genius or grifter. That way you get to be involved in the making of the show. And we love it because it gives us a direct line to our most dedicated listeners. And awesome stuff over at the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources if you are interested. Let's get a Crack-A-Pack going now. I mentioned I want to do the, what do they call these, collector boosters?
Yeah, I think collector's edition.
Collector's something. No, not collector's edition. Collector's something booster, I think. Anyway, I have another one, and we're opening it. And we're going to give... So I've got a pile that is going to be given away to patron that's already done. This is going to start the new one. We'll probably just give these both away next week on the show or something. So let's get into this. So this is one of those special boosters that has all, what are they? I don't know. They're all special. They're all either foil or the full art ones or the kind of fancy Throne of Eldraine style ones.
The kind of like storybook styled adventure cards. Those look really cool, by the way.
Yeah, all of these are really pretty.
And some of these are a combination. You can get like a foil, like I got a foil murderous rider that also is the cool story looking thing.
Woo!
You know, that sort of
nice.
thing.
Yeah, last week we got the Castle Lochthwain, which is like the full art foil version, so that was pretty cool. All right, the one issue with these is that they're not great for Crack-a-Pack because the rarity things are different. You get like 4 or 5 rares or something. So anyway, whatever. Giant Skewer is the first card out. Nope. Merchant of the Veil. Nope.
Oh, I do want to say that my estimation of Merchant has continued to rise. I think the card is very good.
Okay, I like it too. I just wouldn't, first.
No, I mean, I'm not looking to first pick it. That'd be a pretty poor pack. But like when I select a Merchant of the Veil, like third pick, I don't feel like I got unlucky. Like that, it is it's a good card because it smooths out your draws, like by letting you haggle the cycling one basically, and then. It also enables the draw 2 cards deck, the red-blue deck, pretty nicely. Or if you have like a red-black version or something that has like one of the rares or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then it also just helps with mana flood. Like it's just a good card. So I have been impressed with the card.
Corridor Monitor is next. It looks gorgeous in foil.
I've not been impressed with Corridor Monitor, just to be clear.
Yeah, it's just a you do what you got to do type card when you need a 2-ball. Golden Egg. Fine. That
one is also very good.
This one's seen some play outside of Limited as well, right?
Yeah, it's part of the Esper Doom Foretold deck. But one note about Golden Egg, if I'm not going over our strategy content allotment for this week, which I know is extremely low, but no. Golden Egg is, again, it's a card that ties a lot of decks together. Like it's the kind of card that when you're trying to make a draw 2 deck, it's good. It's good in decks that are trying to splash a color or a food based deck. It's just good in a lot of different decks.
Mm-hmm. Fairy Guidemother is our first. This is actually a foil spellbook looking one, so that's cool. And you said you liked Fairy Guidemother a bit more than you thought you would on the last show.
Yeah, those decks have been pretty good. The aggressive decks, and Fairy Guidemother is frequently a card that, it's the card they least want you to have when they've barely stabilized and you've got like a 4-power creature in play. And then it's also a fine 1-drop if you really need to. And if you get something like Edgewall Innkeeper, then you're just like really rolling in it.
Mm-hmm. Now this next 1-drop is not, you're not going to say any of those things about it. It's Beloved Princess, which has been horrendous.
No, Beloved Princess is not good.
No. Frogify? Fine.
I still don't like this card. I didn't like it when it was Kasmina's Transmutation. I don't like it now. So
okay,
not a big fan.
Next one's good. It's Savvy Hunter, 1 green black 3/3. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you get a food, and you can sack 2 foods to draw a card. I would actually take it out of the pack currently. There is really nothing that made me excited, and I'll take a gold card if I need to.
Oh, I mean, Savvy Hunter is just a fantastic card. I don't mind starting with that, even if it's a gold card.
Agreed. Shepherd of the Flock. This is the 1 and a white 3/1. And it has Usher to Safety, white instant return target permanent you control to its owner's hand.
This one's competitive with Savvy Hunter. I would take Savvy Hunter still. I think the power level is just that much higher. You are excused. But Shepherd of the Flock is a premium card.
Yeah, I agree. All right, this is where things get kind of interesting because now we've got a bunch of uncommons. Here's Hypnotic Sprite with the cool alternate art and all that.
Yeah, Hypnotic Sprite's very good. This is the blue 2/1 flyer, but it also has Adventure of 2 and a blue counter target spell that costs 3 or less. So it's, again, one of the reasons we love Adventure cards so much is you can just play this on turn 2 and you feel pretty good about it. Or you can, hold up 3 mana, counter their like 2 or 3 drop, depending on what turn it is. And then on the next turn or a turn or 2 later, play it and get a nice little clean 2-for-1.
Yeah, and a relevant creature even at that middle to later stage of the game as well.
Yeah.
Embereth Shieldbreaker. We got this one last time. The 1 in red 2/1 with Battle Display. Destroy target artifact. Not going to take here.
No.
Smitten Swordmaster. This card's been pretty good. This is the 1 and a black 2/1 lifelinker, and it has Curry Favor as its adventure. It's black. It's a sorcery. You gain life, and each opponent loses X life for X is the number of knights you control. Totally fine.
Yeah, it's a fine card. I'm not liking it above
knights, but
I'm not liking it above any of the good uncommons or any of these things.
Okay, now things really go off the rails. So we got a Shimmer Dragon, which isn't in the set, I don't think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't even know what this card is.
Yeah, so it's 4 blue for a 5/6 flyer. It's awesome, by the way. As long as you control 4 or more artifacts, it has hexproof, and you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to draw a card. Yeah.
Okay. The card's very good.
Yeah. So whatever. We'll just disregard it. Next is Castle Lochthwain. This is the full art version non-foil. So we actually got one in both of our packs, although one was foil. Good card. But you and I neither of us were particularly high on it. I still like Savvy Hunter over it.
Oh, totally. I would take Hypnotic Sprite over it as well. I would take Shepherd of the Flock too. Like these are all better.
Agreed. Our rare is a foil full art Black Lance Paragon. That's the 1 and a black 3/1 flash knight. And when it enters the battlefield, target knight gains death touch and lifelink until end of turn.
I do like this card. It serves a lot of purposes. It's good. It's good when you're attacking with cheap, kind of crappy knights. It's good as a blocker out of nowhere. Gains you a bunch of life. It's also just a 2-mana knight that trades off because there's a lot of ways to get creatures back from the graveyard, and in particular knights. Barrow Witches and this is a fantastic combo. That said, I'm still taking Savvy Hunter. Well, Doomblade on attackers only. It doesn't kill like an attacking flyer, for example, like attacking ground creatures. I can't.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
This can't block a flyer. So,
I see what you're saying. Sure.
Yeah. Like, it's Doomblade if they're attacking you with ground creatures, but it's definitely not Doomblade if they're killing you with a 4/4 flyer.
Yeah, non-first strike ground creatures. Yeah, okay.
So even though this card is flexible and in one color and quite powerful, I think Savvy Hunter is just like off the charts. Like, I think Savvy Hunter is just a very, very strong card. So
yeah, I still haven't actually forgiven Savvy Hunter for apparently slaying Elmer, throwing Elmer over her shoulders, draping some squirrels and rabbits from Elmer's appendages, and then walking towards us with a glare. But I would still take her here because Savvy Hunter is amazing. Yeah,
I think so too.
By the way, we got a food token. It's a foil. It's also a giant token.
That's cool.
It is not the banana one. So
what makes giants?
Let's see. The opportunity giant opportunity.
Oh, the giant beanstalk one. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, where you sack 3 foods or whatever. That one. Okay. So there's our Crack-A-Pack for Throne of Eldraine. So, Luis, let's get into it. This is Genius or Grifter. And you know what? I actually meant to I always like to look after our new listeners, right? Anybody who's just hopping on the show, and maybe they're going, well, okay, they've been talking a lot about this thing, but maybe they don't actually know what the thing is.
Let me explain it.
Yeah, why don't you explain it?
So Genius or Grifter is originally it's a sign-off, but it's one of the ones that has the concept that just lives on, where basically we analyze mostly Magic situations initially, but this episode goes all over the place, situations or actions people take, and you evaluate whether they're genius or grifter, as in whether, wow, that's really smart and, you're really clever for thinking of it, or wow, that's grifter, that's scummy, that's unethical. And of course, some of these kind of cross the line and can be a bit of both, but we're going to come to a definitive conclusion on which they are, as we get through these.
And that is kind of the fun of it, is that you kind of have to be one or the other. I mean, unless it's just something like, let's just say it's illegal, right? That's a little different, but everything else is just sort of like.
This is very similar to a thing we also talk about often, are EGAs, ethical gray areas.
Yes.
Like, for example, like if you're in a casino and they overpay your bet, you bet $20 and they accidentally pay you like $40. Is it an EGA to keep that money? And
right.
I actually think it is an ethical gray area in the sense that if you overbet, they often will keep your money, right? So,
yeah,
like you got to think it kind of washes out. Anyways, Genius or Grifter is a good way to evaluate the situations you either have found yourself in or are considering, depending on what you're looking at.
All right. So, are you ready?
Oh, let's do it.
All right. So the first one is actually, I didn't get who it was from, but the first one is turn 1, land go. Opponent plays a Tarn. So I guess a Scalding Tarn.
Yeah.
Turn 2, Thoughtseize scene, 2 Oko, 1 island, and some spells. I grouse about the Okos. Guess I'll take Remand since I have the Okos covered, then cast Pithy Needle. Opponent, yeah, that's pretty good. And then our hero says, I'll name Scalding Tarn.
And
So-
to clear that up, Needle lets you basically name a card. You can't play activated abilities of that card. So the implication is that they're going to Needle Oko, because that's why they said, I have the Okos covered, and then you cast Needle. The opponent didn't crack Scalding Tarn in response. Then they named Scalding Tarn, and the opponent's land is now a blank. So is it genius or grifter to imply you're going to name Oko to lull your opponent into a false sense of security or not responsiveness, and then instead name Scalding Tarn?
It's
I think this is
interesting.
genius.
Yeah, because so the idea here, right, is that the onus is actually on your opponent, right? Because the way this works is when you cast Pithy Needle, it goes on the stack. If your opponent says that it resolves, which is what the that's pretty good quote from the opponent says, is saying, yeah, that's pretty good. In other words, it resolves. Now the player must name Pithy Needle, not before. So you've tricked your opponent into thinking that you're naming something that you're not, but it's really on them to say, okay, it resolves. What are you naming? Right. And then they, or whatever, or to say, are you naming Oko? Or whatever, right? To try to get into the weeds on, okay, that's still on the stack. This hasn't happened yet, that type of thing. You're going to say genius on this one, huh?
You can imply whatever you want. Like, if you attacked me with 2 creatures and I flashed in a creature and said like, wow, that, your questing beast is just going to be too big of a hit. I guess I'll flash in Blackland's Paragon. Mm-hmm. And then you don't kill it. And then I block something else. Like, I don't think that's bad either. Like, you can imply whatever you want. They're not taking any illegal game actions or doing anything which I consider crossing the line. I think it's pretty clever to intimate that you're going to name Oko. Like, wow, Needle's really good against Oko. And then you're like, okay, I'll cast Needle. And then they say, okay. And you're like, okay, I'll name Scalding Tarn. They had all that information, right? They could have just looked at the board and said like, wow, if you name Scalding Tarn, that'd be bad for me.
Yes, they could have definitely done that. I'm going to say Grifter, and here's my reasoning on it.
Whoa.
I don't want to sit here and play this stupid game every round where everybody's like, hey, so Oko's a pretty good card, huh, buddy? And you're like, I know what you're doing. Can we just play Magic, please? Like, because it only works if somebody's not expecting it. Once it becomes the standardized norm that everybody's trying to trick everybody, it's just like, it's an eye roll, right? And I don't want to get to the point where that happens because that's just not cool. So I'm going to say Grifter.
You're just saying you wouldn't want more people acting like this, so you don't want to encourage it.
Exactly.
Look, one of my original Genius or Grifters involved Needle. Needle is a card with a lot of weird stuff where someone, and this one I thought was actually Grifter. I'll just go through it. His opponent has Birds of Paradise in play, and Needle can't stop mana abilities, so naming Birds of Paradise with Needle does not accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. The person with the Needle called a judge, talked the judge away from the table, came back and said, I'll play Needle and I'll name Birds of Paradise. And the opponent assumed, because of the implication that Needle could stop birds. I think that's Grifter because you're wasting a judge's time, and I think you're doing your best to misrepresent how the game works. I don't like winning in that way.
All right. That's pretty good, though, I gotta say. All right. Next one comes from Daniel, who says, friend says, you have 3 untapped land, right? Opponent. Yes. Friend. Okay. Declares attackers. Opponent. Before blockers, cast Restoration Angel. Friend. What the hell? Opponent. I had 3 lands untapped. I also had 4 lands untapped.
Come on, this
friend.
is just
judge.
This is just Grifter. This is just lying to the opponent. You're using just complete semantic just garbage.
It's not lying. What they said was literally true. What are you talking about?
Yeah, sure. This is come on. This is
pure Grifter.
One way to tell whether something's Grifter is I believe that this is just illegal under Magic rules. I think it would count as lying to the opponent.
Yeah.
And given that, it's
nice try.
The easiest Grifter I've ever seen.
Easy Grifter. Next comes from Josh, who says, Hi, Marshall. I recently competed in a modern MCQ, which was my first large-scale competitive event. I found a lot of people, when they were on the back foot, were really slowing down their play and kept looking at the clock, obviously trying to play for the draw. I know it's not against the rules, but when it takes so long at an event that takes up the whole day, it gets really annoying, and I got super frustrated at my opponents. No matter where I looked, no matter where I was, I just took the loss, never playing for it because it's not fun for me. Genius or Grifter. Interesting that Josh says, I know it's not against the rules when it is.
Yeah. So basically, you need to play at a pace which is conducive to finishing a match of Magic. And that means that intentionally slowing down your pace to play for the draw is actually stalling. So that's Grifter. I think we're both assuming here that Josh is asking whether the opponent's actions were Grifter, in which case I think that yes, they clearly were. Like you can't. I mean, you can. It's illegal to slow down your play such that your opponent and you and your opponent are unable to finish a game.
Exactly. Yeah. Total Grifter and against the rules and just a really bad look.
And it's unpleasant and it's just not fun. Like
So Josh,
it's just
we
bad
feel
on all
you.
levels. Yep.
It is. Yeah, we feel you, man. That what you were seeing there was not good behavior. Next comes from Adam. Excuse me, who says, when my daughter was learning to play at around 8 years old, she used to attack into defenders and then pretend to notice the defenders after declaring attackers and would say something like, oh, dang, I didn't see him. Usually the opponent would offer to let her take it back. She would refuse. Then after they blocked, she would blow them out with combat tricks. And Adam says, for the record, I hated her doing this.
This is awesome. I love it.
It's unreal leveling from an 8-year-old.
It's just so good. Like,
man,
the fact that your daughter's 8 years old and doing this is very impressive. I also think it's just very cool that, that she's really getting into the mind games. I also think that this is genius. Like, well, I guess it's not Grifter. It's not genius because it's also just like, look, I've done this kind of thing just when playing for fun. I haven't done this like in like a tournament or whatever, but like it is just very nonsensical. It's very funny.
Yeah. And the truth is it's just genius anyway, because they could just say no. Like it's kind of a jerk move to tell an 8-year-old kid, no, you can't take back your attack that you just didn't happen to see the creature. But you could also just be like, look, you got to learn how to play, right? Like just look first or whatever. And then, it doesn't change anything anyway. So great stuff, though. That is really funny. That is really,
basically, I'm of the opinion that for most of the time, if you're just if your opponent has all the information and you're not misrepresenting what is going on, like saying you have 3 lands untapped and you have 4, like her opponents in this spot can still just decide whether they want to block or not. And yes, what she is playing on the fact that you don't think an 8-year-old is going to be up to these mind tricks, but hey, just might as well milk that advantage for what you can, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get something out of it. You just learned to read 2 years ago, for crying out loud.
Right. So look at it this way. If, when I'm playing against like, one of my teammates and I'm like, I attack, I'm like, oh, I didn't see you had a blocker. They're like, okay, do you want another attack? I'm like, no, it's okay. I already made the play. They just look at me and they know I'm up to something. Like, it's not genius or Grifter. I'm just doing kind of like basically the equivalent of verbal nonsense. And a good lesson from all of these is basically don't believe when your opponent does stuff like that. Like when I'm playing Magic and my opponent is Hollywooding, like trying to make me think something or do something, I'm just very suspicious of them. They're my opponent. They're trying to win the game. They're not trying to give me useful information. So when your opponent tells you something that might make you think, oh, they're showing weakness here, or they're making it seem like this is important or unimportant. Like you can pick up on those if you're really good at reading, people's body language or reading like the information they're giving you. But most of the time, if you're really noticing it, it's because they're trying to give you this intentionally, and which means you have to think why. And in this case, it's because she wanted them to block. Right. So it's just to pick up the pen trick. Right? You pick up the pen like you're going to write down damage when they're deciding whether to attack or not. So they're like, oh, of course I'll attack. You're going to take it. And then you block. Like if your opponent picks up the pen, just think, do they want me to attack? And if you think, maybe they do, you could just not attack. You have that option.
Right. And I think it is best strategically to just get rid of all of that extra stuff. Like you could get in the weeds on that, on I have a read or they're trying to trick me. What can I gain from this? But the truth of the matter is if you just sent, a pro player a screenshot of the board and didn't mention any of the other stuff, you would be in a much better position just following what they did rather than, adding all this extra nonsense in there. And also, to reverse that, if you're the one who tends to do that in these competitive situations, you're probably just wasting brain cycles on this stuff anyway.
Or just not. Or you're doing something that, like, this is one of the things you see as people try to go from playing at their store to playing in PTQs to maybe playing in a Magic Fest to trying to play at the Pro Tour. Tricks like this will not work against savvy opponents. You get paired against the savvy hunters of the world, and they're you're just going to be giving them information. You're not going to be tricking them, right?
And there's also interesting extra little equity that you lose. Like one of the things that you'll see, from the pro scene at the higher levels is networking is just a big deal. Like who you know and who you trust and who you want to have on your team and be around and stuff. And if I was an up and coming pro and I was pulling these moves on the bigger names, the more established names, I would assume that one of them would be like, what is this guy's deal? Right. Yeah. Like, I don't want to be around this person. Like he's trying to do this weird lying, trickery stuff. He's not just playing Magic and trying to win, and your reputation does matter, at least at some level on a game like this. So just all these little reasons not to, not to do this type of stuff.
For sure.
Next one is,
what does it say about me that I like doing it in testing?
It says a lot about you. It really is very revealing. And I've done plenty of side drafts against you, and that's when you're really in full ham mode for sure. Next one comes from our friend Derek, who says, you cast Stab Wound on your opponent's creature and it resolves. Stab Wound, by the way, is from M15. It's 2 and a black. It's a aura that enchants a creature. The creature gets -2/-2. And at the beginning of the upkeep of the enchanted creature's controller, that player loses 2 life. So you cast Stab Wound and it resolves. They untap and immediately ask, draw, while staring at you and holding the top card of your deck. You say yes, then immediately realize that you missed your trigger because it happens, of course, on their upkeep, which is before the draw. Every subsequent turn, they maintain the same posture, immediately untapping and asking draw while touching the top of their library.
So the question is your opponent basically saying, can I draw, instead of, hey, resolve Stab Wound? They're giving you the opportunity to say, take your 2 damage, but they're not prompting you to do so. I don't think this is genius or Grifter. I think this is... This is not the most friendly way to play, but it's not unethical or unfriendly. It's just, this is, solid like gamesmanship, or just like, I'm going to follow the rules. I'm not going to make it easy on you, but I'm also not going to try to rush through my draw. Like, I mean, we've both seen people who are like, you Stab Wound their creature, they just untap and immediately just go to draw, don't say anything. And then if you're like, hey, Stab Wound, they're like, okay, I'll take the 2.
Right.
That is Grifter, you know?
Or they'll try to talk to you during that stage or distract you or whatever. Yeah. This is, I think, a healthy middle ground. Is still holding the proper player responsible for remembering their trigger while also making sure to open the door and give them the chance to do so without coddling them and saying, well, I'll just remember your trigger for you, which you don't really have to do. So, yeah, right in the middle there for Derek. Next one comes from Ian, who says, non-magic related. You accidentally buy a censored version of a CD in 2006 or so. So this is like, I'm assuming that he means one of the ones where like the swear words are changed or blanked out or whatever. You bought, a CD from one of your favorite artists, and it's censored instead of having explicit lyrics. So it's like bleeped out, or they used words that sound similar that aren't swear words or whatever. Right. But you accidentally bought that one. So your friend buys the regular version of the same CD. They will never notice or care, so you switch with them when they aren't paying attention. I mean, come on, this is just... That's just pure grifter. It's just pure grifter. If they're not going to notice or care, just ask them, and then you're completely in the clear and being very reasonable. If you're stealing from them, that's not reasonable. Yeah, that's interesting. So Ian must have, if whoever this was, must have thought that if they asked, that the person would say no, but also that they would never notice.
Yeah, this is just clear grifter.
But it's like theft-ish to do that. Like, yes, that is definitely grifter, Ian. A couple come from MH, who was pretty active on this post as well, with some really funny, really good takes. Waiting for your favorite streamer to queue up for matches and trying to get paired against them. They put sniping. And then closing the stream so you don't get info on their hand and thought process, so not ghosting, so you get to play against them.
I think this is genius. Like, this is it's. I mean, as long as is
that because you do this sometimes?
No. When I do this, it's definitely not. This is when I try to queue up against Cheon when he's streamed playing an anti-Cheon deck.
Yeah.
But imagine like MH likes watching, let's say, Cheon when he used to stream, and Cheon's playing standard and just queues up with the standard deck they like to try to get paired against Cheon and not ghost. That's completely fine. You're getting engaged with what they're doing. You're trying to, join in. I think it's totally fine.
Okay. What about this other one, also from MH? You see an opponent fixing their deck, perhaps with the double nickel pile shuffle method, which mana weaves 2 spell 1 land throughout the whole deck. So basically, MH is saying you observe your opponent cheating, right? Yeah. We call it mana weaving, by trying to not make their deck random, but rather having a optimal distribution of lands and spells. Rather than calling a judge to see if you prove that they're cheating, you perform a 3-pile shuffle, which, if they've mana weave, will sort all the lands and spells into the last pile, which you can put on the bottom for them to only draw unplayable hands. I mean, this is obviously an absurd scenario that isn't really feasible. But let's say it did happen. Let's say that you had the power to do so. Really,
this has definitely happened. Oh yeah, this is I've heard this question before, and part of it is that when people used to mana weave more often, this is one of the things that some people would do against them.
I just question whether you could really effectively unmana weave them.
No, it works out.
Without looking at their cards.
It works out.
You'd have to know where it started, right? Like, if you didn't know which the top card was, then you could be just doing the opposite of what you wanted or something, right?
Yeah, but if they're mana weaving, you usually see. I don't know. I've heard of this happening before. So
okay, I'm not buying it, but also I love the scenario. So what is the? Oh,
it's a grifter. Easy.
So it's basically re-cheating. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah. Like, if you think your opponent's cheating, call a judge. If they've mana weaved, it's going to be super apparent. And the reason those things that's better is A, you're not stacking their deck, right? You're going to have a judge deal with it and likely disqualify them. And B, you're not leaving them in the tournament to play against other players. Like, what this does is it lets you get away with, punishing the cheater, but lets the cheater continue to cheat other people and maybe not even know that you took these actions. So there's no real reckoning for it. So I think it's grifter.
Okay. Yeah. Also, if you look at the rules, right, each player is responsible for randomizing the deck in these scenarios, right? And you're not doing that. So you're actually cheating as well. This is a really tough one for me. This one is, everyone else gets into the other lane. You wait till the very last minute and merge in, zipping by as many cars as you do. Genius or grifter? So here's the deal with this. So we're talking about driving, right? And, everybody's seen it where people are responsibly getting over in a sort of deliberate way and not, putting on their signal and kind of getting over because everybody knows that they have to. And then some people just go zipping past and they're just like, screw you, I'll just jam over at the very last second. Yeah. I hate it when people do this, but here's the catch. It's actually proper to do so, mathematically or whatever. Like, they've done some studies and, they call it zippering. And if all the cars go to the front, it's actually more efficient than if people try to get over sooner.
Wow.
But it feels wrong when you're sitting there and other people are going by you and getting ahead.
Yeah, it does seem like it's wrong, but I can see why. If it's more efficient, I can understand that.
Yeah. So my assumption, though, is that it's marginally more efficient, and the chance that everybody just feels angry or wronged or something like that is worse. So I'm going to call it grifter. I don't care if it's slightly more efficient. It feels bad.
All right, that's fair. I was going to call it Grifter before you said it was more efficient. So I like that. I like that you're still landing on that side.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, look, if it made a dramatic difference everywhere, fine. But there's no way it changes the outcome of traffic or whatever meaningfully. Okay, next one comes from our friend Nikolai Bolus, who says, on MTG Arena, attacking a 2/2 into their 3/3 when you have a combat trick. Then, before they decide whether to block, using the oops emote.
I think this is basically the same as using verbal tricks like that in the previous example. So I don't think it's genius or grifter. I think you can do it if you want. It's just not that big of a deal.
Okay, I'm going to come down once again on Grifter because I just don't want to face this. But also, I think you are right, though, fundamentally, because look, again, I have the information. I can, you can also just mute your opponent. Like, right. They can waste their time doing it if they like. But
basically, be highly suspicious of anything your opponent says that they don't have to say, and don't think about it like, look, if I talk to you during a match and ask you where you're from, it's not because I want to try to cheat you, or distract you. But but if your opponent's saying something that looks gameplay related, you can often just disregard it.
Yeah, that's probably the best way. The only reason I lean Grifter once again is just because there is a real feel bad when that happens the first time. Like the way this works out is if people do this, the first time you fall for it, you get burned, you feel wronged on some level. It's frustrating. You feel like somebody did something unethical to you, and then you never let it happen again. But it just never needed to happen in the first place for that one stupid combat that you feel bad. Because that could be the time when somebody leaves, when they go, you know what? Magic players are scummy. I'm out of here. I don't want to do this anymore. That kind of thing. So anyway, next comes from Tim, who says, playing in the final round of a tournament to get a bye to Nationals the following day, my opponent misses their Scarab God trigger and draws a card without even noticing.
Okay.
Their friend who is watching asks us to pause the game, then calls for a judge. The judge, of course, rules that the trigger was missed, but my opponent immediately realized what they had done and didn't miss another one all match. I still won, but I wasn't impressed, says Tim.
So
is that a mandatory trigger? Is that a
no? So the way it would work now is basically it is illegal for the opponent's friend to do that. And in fact, if that happened, I would ask the judge to remove the friend because, and if the friend was in the tournament, they might actually get DQ'd. You can't point out things in another person's match. And especially the way triggers are ruled now, they didn't point out, first of all, it wasn't even a rules violation. You can just miss triggers. Second, even if it was a rules violation this is a competitive tournament playing for buys at Nationals, like you can't say anything. Like the correct procedure is like, Marshall, if I watch you play a match and your opponent attacks you for 2 and you take 3 and neither player notices, it's not to stop the match. It's to go get a judge and let the judge adjudicate it. So what they did here, I'd be really pissed if I were Tim, and I'm sure that Tim looks like he was. And you basically don't want to end up in a situation where someone's friend is helping them win or get an advantage in the match, which is what's happening here. So I'm not a fan of this.
Yeah, I would say Grifter as well. Okay, I've got an on-the-fly genius or Grifter for you, Luis, okay?
Yeah.
Very similar. But instead, the friend points out something that is detrimental to you. Should they speak up or not?
What do you mean detrimental?
Oh, like, let's say both players missed something that, would have changed the outcome of the game or something. Like,
okay.
Something like, let's say you're in combat and a creature has trample, and but it's only temporary or something like that, and the players forget and they just write down the damage wrong, and your friend is watching you and they say, "Hey, let's call a judge," or they just say it or whatever and say, "No, that was actually 5 extra damage because of the trample from this one card you guys both forgot, so the game's over."
Basically. I think spectators should not be saying anything there, no matter who is advantageous for. And I would not want my friend to say something that helped me or hurt me. Like, I don't want them to call Woody. A judge. Yeah.
Thanks, Woody.
Sure. Oh, I see where this is coming from. This makes more sense now.
Yeah, I was not actually mad at Woody for calling it out, but that scenario did happen with me. Woody was watching and he did point it out, and I know why. I mean, he just wanted to make sure that the game was correct, and I was grateful that he did. But also it felt weird because when somebody says something, it feels like it throws the balance off one way or the other, you know, like players are going to miss some number of things anyway. Next one comes from Heather, who says, your opponent cuts your deck by dealing the first 7 cards off the top, then putting them on the bottom of your library. Congratulations. The best hand just got put on the bottom of your deck. Genius or Grifter?
I don't understand this question. Is Heather saying that they, you know, like they had cheated and stacked their deck? Because that's the only way this makes any sense. Otherwise, they're just cutting the deck. It doesn't matter whether you cut 0 cards, 1 card, 7 card, or 25 cards. Yeah,
so this is neither Genius or Grifter, but it is legal. Unless, of course, your opponent was cheating. Yeah, they can do it.
Or you were cheating and stacking your deck.
Whoa. Yeah, that's
what I mean. Like, I really don't. I'm not really getting it, but.
Yeah. All right. So next one comes from James, who says, this is a little weird. In a unified standard tournament, I'm in the 3rd seat playing game 2 against my opponent. In seat 2, players are sideboarding, and my teammate's opponent is verbally hemming and hawing about what to sideboard, given that he has minimal information about what my teammate is playing due to an early game loss because of registration violation. My teammate and I are both playing black. My teammate's opponent proceeds to watch my game, certainly using the maximum amount of time players are allotted for sideboarding and verbalizing his decisions the entire time in order to decide what he should sideboard based on the contents of my deck and sideboard. Genius or Grifter?
If the opponent used the maximum but didn't go over the maximum, then, well, first of all, just so people are clear, communication is legal. So the teammates, the 2 opponents can just talk to each other. So this isn't like they were talking in a way that makes it unethical to do so. It's more like, is it okay to spend this time to see more of what you're playing to make that decision? Mm-hmm. And the answer, I think, is that as long as they're not going over the amount of time, I don't think it's inherently bad. Like, it's clever. It's not. It's using, you know, the timing to get an advantage, but I don't think it's unethical because they're playing within the rules.
Yeah, I think so too.
And not only playing within the rules, they're not really abusing the rules either. I don't think so.
No, they're not. They're bumping up against it, but they're fine. You're allowed to do that. That's genius. Yeah. I have
a really funny story, which I told in a long ago sign off, I'm sure, but a similar thing happened, but not in a team tournament. So what happened was, Cheon was playing against, Gay Balls, and Cheon and Gay Balls, you know, this is at Nationals many years ago. And then right next to Gabe was sitting Jerry T, actually. Jerry and Gabe were playing the same deck. Cheon was sitting next to David Ochoa. David Ochoa and him were playing the same deck. So it is 2 of the same matchup just next to each other. Mm-hmm. And Gabe finishes his game 1 first. And as he's deciding how to sideboard, he's just watching then Jerry play against Ochoa to get more information about what's in Ochoa's deck.
That's good. I would do that.
It's really funny.
Yeah, it requires a lot of meta. Like, you have to know the people, know the fact that they were together, that they tested. And
I think it's fine. It is just funny how that worked out.
I think so too. Next one comes from Cameron. And I'll tell you what, Luis, this is one that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be able to relate to. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. He says, this is obviously not legal, but I still see it all the time, and I'm not sure how to respond to it. Players at an F&M event sharing information during the draft. For example, oh man, look at this sweet card I pulled, or I think I'm the only one in green, or other forms of showing cards or talking about what they've pulled. This obviously has some strategic advantages since the player downstream of you is a lot less likely to think about red being open if they know you've got some insane red bomb or are heavily invested in red, which means you're more likely to get past red in the next pack. I assume mostly people do this because they don't know better or aren't taking the draft seriously, but it still drives me nuts. And I wonder if on some level people are doing this to try to dissuade people from cutting them. obviously a grift, but is this a grift that I should bother complaining about? And if so, how? And I can certainly relate to this from Cameron, because I think Cameron nails it. I think that that's exactly what's going on. It's not that people are like coming into the F&M with this idea of like, I'm going to scam everybody and do this thing. But, when you do say those things, it does send a little bit of a signal downstream. You do get a little something for it. And a lot of these people that play really casually just don't think of it that way, right? And I feel for Cameron, because you don't want to be the person at the table, right? Who's like, hey guys, this is serious. Everybody's there. It's Friday night. You're having fun. You're doing a draft, right? But at the same time, there is integrity to these things that does kind of matter. And that type of table talk, shouldn't happen.
Yeah. It drives me crazy. I mean, I used to draft a ton like at local stores, and it's just like, oh, I guess no one's in green, or what is this still doing in the pack? And
the classic.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, can we not do that?
Right.
And I think that there's ways to kind of deal with that aren't, hey guys, stop talking at the table. It's more like, guys, can we not talk about, can we not say stuff like that while we're in the middle of the draft, And like, don't overreact, but like, you don't have to put up with that. Like, it is not good. So,
yeah. Another thing that I would consider is just talking to the owner, because I think that, if Cameron explained it like how he did to us and just said, look, I'm here to have fun and stuff, and I don't want to create like some rules lawyery environment. It's just, this does kind of affect how much I like playing here. Right. And so if you have either the owner or the person who's running the F&M, the judge or whoever it happens to be there, say, hey guys, let's make sure that during the draft we don't talk about our picks in any way. That can create some unfair advantages, and we're here to have fun, but let's just make sure we don't talk about those picks during the draft. That takes the pressure off of Cameron and puts it where it should be, which is on the person running it.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I guess, ultimately the owner's responsibility, right? So
that's right.
I think that's completely fine to kind of ask for some assistance there.
Yeah, and I don't think you should feel bad about it, Cameron. It's clear that you're not trying to rules lawyer people, but that does actually matter a lot. When we do drafts and stuff, I'm always the one who's saying that stuff. Like, I mean,
it just also depends on your appetite for kind of public confrontation, or what have you, right? Like, if you're comfortable saying like, hey, can we not do this? Just go ahead and do it. If you don't want to do that, yes, you can talk to the owner or the judge or whoever, because that's kind of their, responsibility as well.
Yeah. Next one comes from Adam, who says, former pro player saying if he had the resources, he'd play with all Japanese versions of his entire deck. Then if paired against a Japanese player, change them legally to entirely Russian.
I'm gonna call a little bit like the framing of this being former pro player. I've noticed whenever someone mentions a pro player like this, it really is not an actual pro. But in any case,
that is actually true in this case, because I know who they're talking about.
I think that this is I would call this grifter, not because it's illegal, but because it's just bad intentions.
Agreed. Total grift. It's also just stupid and short-sighted and not putting your resources where they should go. And
if you're spending time and money on this,
re-sleeve your deck.
You're wasting it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like this, we call this grifter to protect the person who did this or would want to do this. Next is Joe, who says, playing with Vivian Arcbow Ranger in Core 2020 Limited. You announce activating Vivian's +1, which is distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 2 target creatures. They gain trample until end of turn. You put a counter on 2 of your creatures and attack with them without announcing trample. Is that genius or grifter?
I don't think it's either genius or grifter. I think it's just a play you can make. Again, this goes back to your opponent has correct information about the game state, which is these are what you're targeting. They can read Vivian and figure it out. And if they ask, hey, what does that do? I don't think that it's great to say this puts 2 +1 counters without mentioning trample. But saying, hey, I'm going to Vivian these 2 creatures, I think that's totally fine. And
I do too. I mean, look, you're allowed to just point at the 2. You can say like plus Vivian and then just point at the two creatures. Like, you don't have to say this stuff. So it's totally fine to do that, Joe. It's just, again, think about where you're trying to get your edges. Andy says, you have the power to disrupt the economy of a foreign country, and you wield that power to pressure them to damage the reputation of your political opponents. Genius or grifter? I'm going to say grifter on that one, Andy.
So of course it's a grifter. It's a grift that is unlikely to be punished if history is any indication. So maybe It's a good thing to run, but yes, it's a grift.
It is a grift. Joe says, oh no, Joe says, you co-host a podcast and promise to announce your retirement in a sign-off. Instead, you announce it in response to a genius or grifter question. And by the way, Joe says, just kidding. Please don't leave movies, which is really the worst thing to put in, Joe, because you're giving him exactly what he wants, which is more attention.
That does bring me to an interesting announcement.
No, don't even. I can't do this, man. You're going to give me a heart attack with this nonsense.
All right. I promise I will not announce this in response to a genius or grifter question.
God, whatever. All right. And that is grifter, Joe, by the way. 100% grifter. Also, you never promised to announce anything. That is also grifter, Joe. Corey says, you go to do a transformative sideboard and set aside your replacement cards for the new deck and begin to take out the cards from the original build in anticipation you have pre-sleeved your sideboard cards. You set the 2 piles down and look at each and end up switching them a bunch before choosing one to put back in the deck. Your opponent has no clue if you actually transformed. Genius or grifter. You can do that.
Yeah, I think, again, don't read in too much to the actions your opponent are taking because they might be trying to trick you. This is like a prime example of that.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that this is actually just a reasonable thing to do, because if you are doing let's say you're going to switch out an entire color or an entire strategy, that is take a lot of sleeves because you're going to need lands plus a thing. So you pre-sleeve it. If you just grab that pile from your sideboard, go through your deck, take out a bunch of cards, very clearly put those in the deck box and put the new pile in, your opponent is like, well, you changed something major. Right? Like, I'm not going to bring in my protection from white creature anymore in case white was what you took out. Where if you sort of do a little shell game where you're like, ha, 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 you don't know. I mean, you're sitting in front of the person, right? Like, you do have to be able to switch this without them knowing what and if how many cards you did take out. All right. Now, this one gets a little different. So Corey says, next level. The sideboard cards are pre-sleeved only for the effect and never intended to be sideboarded. That's kind of a waste of time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would do this, but I don't think it's, like I said, it's not genius, it's not grifter. It's just like, it's not where I would spend my time and effort, but I don't think it's a bad place to, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to do.
It's very similar, right, to what people do when they just, like in Constructed, well, they'll just put all 15 cards in their board and then take out the cards they don't want anymore. And sometimes that happens to be all the 15 sideboard cards again.
Yeah,
they just don't want their opponents to know that they didn't change anything. Devin says, hey, Marshall, longtime fan and supporter. It's no exaggeration to say that LR is the reason I play Magic. Awesome. That's great to hear, Devin. I couldn't help but notice that in the last episode, LSV trolled you by playing the admittedly hilarious clip of you reading the infamous Dak Vaden is the greatest thief in the multiverse copy. Yes, I did notice that as well, Devin. I know it's not much to offer, but I made a clip from the MH1 tournament when you were commentating the game between blah, 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 and blah, 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 in which LSV laughed in a way and oh, I see. So we've got some weapons. All right. So Devin, this is just a shot fired across your bow, Luis. We've got ways to fire back, even though I don't think Devin understands how the current sideboard or soundboard situation is in that I cannot simply play things. I guess I could play them on my phone into my microphone, but I think everybody knows I wouldn't want to do that. Well, thanks, Devin, for the thought anyway. Luis, live in fear of our super embarrassing clip that we have.
Apparently.
Yeah. I didn't listen to it, but yeah. We've got one on you, Luis, so take it. Jens says, we are very late in the game, and I have 11 lands in play, and 2 Nicol Bolas Dragon God in hand. I know my opponent has Syncopate and Spell Pierce in hand, and I have 5 mana up. I tap 5 lands, put Bolas on the stack, opponent plays Absorb. I know that I lose if my opponent plays if my opponent's spell pierces my Bolas, so I quickly tap all my remaining 6 lands, play my other Bolas, opponent tries to syncopate for X equals 1. Genius or Grifter? And as it turns out, so basically Jens has over-tapped, trying to make it look like he was tapped out so that his opponent would syncopate for 1 rather than play Spell Pierce. But then his idea is to say, haha, I have tapped too many lands and I have 1 mana floating and I will simply use that mana to pay for your syncopate. Alan Goldman chimed in and said, at first I thought this was a genius, but 106.4a, this is from the tournament rule, says, if any mana remains in a player's mana pool after mana is spent to pay a cost, that player announces that mana is still there. So it's against the rules.
It's just against the rules, yep.
So that is Grifter. And by the way, Jens chimed in and said, sounds fair. I will avoid doing that again. ... Jens also, now Jens likes to push the boundaries here, Luis. Jens is definitely up against it. Jens says, you're running a bit late and assume you're going to miss your bus, so you inform your colleagues that you'll be 30 minutes late for your meeting. Turns out the bus you originally planned is actually 10 minutes late, and you arrive 20 minutes earlier than expected. You've already informed that you'll be 30 minutes late, so why not use the time to buy a coffee and chill for a while? Genius or Grifter?
Oh, total genius. So here's the thing. Once you take the step of letting your colleagues know you're going to be late for a meeting, you've already paid that cost. If you then show up 10 minutes late instead of 30 minutes late, they already have mentally said, okay, they were late for this meeting. They don't care whether you're 10 or 30 minutes late. I don't think that matters that much. And given you've already paid the cost, you might as well just, get your bearings, in order, having a coffee, relax for a bit. Where my answer changes is if this is a meeting that, you're critically important for and they're basically just going to be waiting on you, or something's going to be worse because you're not there. But let's be real. Most meetings, if you just miss them, nothing would happen. So if you're already telling your colleagues, yeah, I'm going to be late to the meeting, and then you end up being less late, like you already told them you were late, you already kind of did that thing, I would just get the coffee. I think it's totally fine.
Based on your answer, you have either done or thought about this a lot.
I've literally done this before.
I knew it. Next is from Tobias.
Look, if you tell someone you're going to be late, hey, can we move the meeting to 2? And then you get in at 1:40, like, why go through the effort of like, hey, can you meet 20 minutes earlier, or showing up in this meeting? Just relax for a little bit.
Love it. You are the authority on this move. Next one comes from Tobias, who says, in my Modern Horizons pre-release, I was losing a match and I cast Phantasmal Form just to draw a card from the spell. Since I was not attacking anyway, I thought I would have some fun and turn 2 of my opponent's creatures into 3/3 flyers, which is the spell's primary effect. Amazingly, the card I top decked was Tornado, allowing me to destroy one of the creatures I just gave flying. Genius or Grifter?
This is just making it's genius in that giving your opponent, it would be genius if Tobias did this intentionally. As is, it's just buffoonery. Even if it worked out well, but there's certainly nothing wrong with it. It's just a cool play.
Yeah, it's definitely genius, Tobias, even if you didn't know. Maybe some part of your brain understood your outs. Well played. Alan says, my group regularly does a proxied vintage cube. One player is known for always drafting Dark Depths Thespian Stage and runs the table. We've even talked about taking it out of the cube. This draft, they were on my right. Pack one, pick one. I took Caracas out of a weak pack. I then flipped it face up to show the table, laughing about it. He then passed me Dark Depths, and I proceeded to put the deck together and go 3-0, becoming the new boogeyman. Showing your draft pick to influence others, genius or Grifter? Oh, that's Grifter.
It's Grifter. Yeah. I mean, you answered the question in the last sentence. Showing your draft pick to influence others. Yes, you're not allowed to do that.
That is against the rules, Alan. I will say that when you're drafting at home versus your friends, sometimes things fly a little more than not. That's probably still not kosher, but yeah.
Well, what I think is completely fine is to like, someone else drafts this deck and then in like late in pack 1, they were hoping to wheel a Vampire Hex Mage and you just take it face up and be like, taste it.
Yes.
A little trash talk between friends is totally fine. You're playing proxied Vintage Cube. Doing it in a way to game the system, though, I don't really like that. Like, that's not what you talking trash. Okay. Gaming the system, trying to get an advantage there. I'm not in love with it.
Mm-hmm. Same. Grifter. Next comes from Thomas, who says, non-magic related story that I retold recently. When I was a teenager, I was playing billiards with my friend, his father, and a few of his father's friends. We were betting money, but basically just for fun, a few dollars. I was shooting for the 8 ball against my friend's father, and he said, wait, this is an important shot. Use my cue stick. I had been using the house cue stick, and he had a nice one that he owned. After missing the shot, my friend leaned over to me and said, my dad just scammed you, right? You've been using that stick all day, so you've gotten used to it. He wanted to throw you off. Was Thomas's friend's dad a genius or a grifter?
Well, I mean, clearly his dad was a grifter, but this is actually even like where the term grifter almost came from. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like getting scammed at pool.
Yeah, pool hall grifters is a tale as old as time. So it's probably a good lesson. It's probably worth the investment. But yes, it was a grifter.
Yes, definitely. But also, you could have said no. Ed says, when your opponent messages good game right before you make an alpha attack, only to respond with a life-saving combat trick or other spell in hopes you won't expect it.
I mean, this is the same question again, basically, which is, can you say stuff to try to trick your opponent? The answer is yes, you can do it. It's not particularly clever, but nor is it unethical as long as you're not like lying to them.
Yeah. And I just don't like it because of the precedent it sets and the fact that it's so short term, like you're going to get somebody once.
I think you can skip the next one because it's literally the same question.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's someone emoting good game and then
well, this one's a little different, but yeah, this is an arena specific one. Yeah, I'll read it. Yeah, so this one comes from Michael. It says, you're playing in a draft mill deck in arena, which yes, you are.
Yes,
for the win,
of course you are.
Yes, you are. For the win, you play your final mill card that requires you to target the other player or the player that you want to mill. With the game asking you which player to mill, your opponent emotes good game. You go to hover over your avatar to bring up the emotes that say good game back and accidentally click and choose to mill yourself. Opponent says oops and swings for lethal their next turn and they win. This happened to me twice. Second time I learned to target them with the mill and then say good game.
So I don't think
that's kind of sweet to try to get somebody to click on the wrong part of the screen somehow.
I don't even know that they were trying to do that. Like you're playing the lethal card and you say good game. I'm sure some people would try to do that, but I think most of the time that's just going to be an honest, good game. That said, it's not your opponent's responsibility to save you from misclicks.
Right. Yes. So
it's not genius. It's not grifter. Just be careful with where you're clicking.
All right. This is perhaps the most important genius or grifter of the whole list here.
Oh, this is the best one. I've been looking forward to it the whole time.
Yeah. So Taylor says, Marshall and Luis, I think my wife keeps planning her travel for work to coincide with trash day, which means she's not home to help me clean the cat's litter box. Is this genius or grifter?
I mean, clearly it's genius. The question is it also grifter?
Genius? Yes.
It's just genius. I'm just in awe. Like I am. I'm like, this is just a W, like, because the thing is, you can have a little counterplay. Because if you notice this, you can at some point just be like, honey, I noticed you're always working that day. And so I end up having to do this. Hey, do you think you maybe balance it out in some other way? But as things stand, if you just don't say anything about it, it's just genius.
I just love it too, because you have to know that he's going to feel crazy bringing this up to his wife. Like, are you actually doing this on purpose? And she can just be like, honey, how could you think I would do that?
the play clearly is not to bring it up in a way that it's like hey, are you doing this on purpose? It's more like, hey, it's kind of lined up so that you all travel on this day. And I was wondering if we could make whatever accommodation is necessary to fix that or whatever. But
the question is, how long has she gotten away with this trick?
Yes.
Just unreal move by Taylor's wife. Thomas says, I am playing blue-red thermo things in standard, a blue-red deck based around casting lots of spells to trigger Thermo Alchemist and Thing in the Ice, and using looting and rummaging combined with madness to get card advantage. On the draw, against an energy deck, my opponent plays turn 1 Attune with Ether and turn 2 Long Tusk Cub. If they get to untap with it, it becomes out of range for my removal spells, and I'll have to end up 2 for 1-ing myself. On my turn 2, I choose not to play a land, go to cleanup, discard Fiery Temper, madness it for a single red, and kill the cub. My opponent had an aggressive hand on the play with the cub and the 4 pump spells, so they proceed to do nothing for 3 turns, and I win. Genius or Grifter?
I just, again, this is a similar question as to a couple of earlier ones, which is you made a neat play in Magic. There's nothing Grifter about this, and in fact, I think this is kind of genius. A lot of people wouldn't have thought of that. So yeah, good play. Yeah,
it's ultimately a strategic question, and yeah, nice play. That was a good one, Thomas. Brian says, at PT 25th anniversary, which I'll remind you is the Team Pro Tour, so teams of 3 players, I tried something that, to my surprise, worked on most of the teams we played against, and I still don't know how ethical it was despite it not being against the rules. I know it worked because after the match, our opponents would often admit to falling for it. The format was standard, and Red-Black Chain Whirler was clearly the best deck. Another viable deck was Blue-White X Control with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. I was on the Chain Whirler deck, and to throw people off, I would intentionally place a Teferi emblem face up on the top of my sideboard for the opposing team to see before game 1 started to hopefully mislead their mulligan decisions. To add to the ploy, since it was a team event, my teammate, who was obviously looped in on the plan, would pretend to be mad at me for seemingly, quote, giving away information and flip my emblem over quickly as if he was trying to conceal the information to further the ploy. Sometimes my opponent would be so zoned in on shuffling and getting their materials out that they wouldn't see the emblem, in which case their teammate would see it and immediately lean over with a whisper and about the information that they gathered, making this plan even more effective. Genius or Grifter? Sure. Sure, it's genius. The opponents have to just play Magic, not pay it. If anything, there's a big takeaway so far from Genius or Grifter is don't pay attention to what your opponent's doing outside of their game actions. Right?
Seriously,
none of this stuff is going to lead you to a big win percentage, and there is a little bit of a downside to it.
Yeah, you can do all this nonsense. Again, I would just ignore it. It's fine. It's cutesy. It's like a little clever, do your thing, whatever. But don't, when your opponent does stuff like this, don't pay attention to it,
Yeah. So you didn't say if you thought this was Genius or Grifter.
I don't think it's either. I think all of these are just kind of nonsensical.
Don't think you know how Genius or Grifter works. You have to decide.
This is probably closer to Grifter than Genius, but I don't think it's a huge nod in either direction.
All right, I'm calling it Genius. Jeff says, in an old school tournament, a player's playing the deck against blue-white-red aggro. The deck player asks if there are 2 The Abyss in play, would they both trigger? The blue-white-red aggro player confirms that if 2 Abyss were in play, they would both trigger. The deck player casts the second, and the blue-white-red player tells them it is essentially legendary, and there can only be 1 in play at a time. This is fine. If you're the blue-white-red player, I'm not answering your questions for you. I'm sorry. Yeah. There are weird Magic scenarios where you can have 2 legendary permanents in play at the same time. Both of them would trigger if that were the case. I don't feel any onus to say about the board state and stuff like that, I do, but about rules, you don't ask your opponent these questions. This is why.
Yeah. Also, I don't even know if that's an accurate answer because the Abyss is a legendary enchantment, or it's actually a world enchantment or enchant world. Mm-hmm. So 2 can't be in play at the same time. But
is there no cards that
maybe there's some possible? Card that I don't know.
Some stupid weird.
It's like a game rule, whatever. I think I think it's not great on the opponent, so it's a little bit grifter. But I also think like don't look to your opponent for answers to rules questions. I mean, look, I know the rules very well, and when my opponents ask me rules questions, I say like, yes, look, this is how it works, but we should call a judge just to be sure. Like, even when I'm like 100% sure, not because I even necessarily want to check my work, but because I don't want my opponent to walk away from the match and afterwards think like, I wonder if that was how the rules worked. You know,
Yeah.
I just don't want that to be a part of the experience.
Yeah, when they ask me, because I'm sure you get asked a lot, I do too, because they're like, oh, you're really into Magic. You do it for, they'll say, how does this work? And I always do answer honestly, because I just have no interest in playing any of these little games. Like, this is the opposite of what I like about Magic, but I always do. And I always give that same caveat that you just mentioned. I say, I do happen to know how it works, and I will tell you, but you should call a judge to ask them, because you shouldn't get in the habit of asking your opponent stuff, even though I happen to know, and I'm not going to lie to you. I don't want people to think that I'm in that playing that game, because I will just tell them straight up how it works. But I always say, no problem if you want to call a judge just to double check, right? Like, because, you shouldn't be asking me. David says, this was an Amonkhet team limited event. My teammate had a scaled behemoth, which has hexproof, in play. The name player copies it with I see. Okay, this was I took this out of a different thing. All right, so the opponent copies it with Vizier of Many Faces. My teammate attempts to use removal spell on the now hexproof Vizier. The player immediately calls a judge, and my teammate is correctly given them. And my teammate is correctly given a warning. It is at this point that the judge attempts to rewind the game to just before casting the spell. The player then spends a good 3 to 4 minutes interrogating the judge on this fix, asking, can you do that over and over again? Eventually, he relents without appealing, and the game progresses to the original fix. So David was asking, because he was playing against a well-known professional player who had some clout in the community. And David's question really revolves around, is it okay for people that feel like they have maybe more influence over a judge than somebody that the judge doesn't know who they are to do that, to ask?
No, I hate that. And again, this goes back to when someone says a pro player did this. Like, you're saying this because you're framing the question in a way that this person is not acting great, in which I don't think they are. Like, look, the judge made a ruling. If you think the judge's ruling was wrong, appeal it. Don't ask the judge, are you sure? Because that's just not how it works. Like, I have had judges make wrong rulings, and I've appealed them, and I have won the appeals. I've also appealed something I didn't know how it worked, and I lost the appeal. But there's nothing wrong with either of those situations. What is wrong is badgering the judge, badgering an opponent, basically doing anything that thinking you're entitled is the worst, right? That's just the worst people everywhere. So don't do that.
Yes. All right. This one comes from Shane, who says, here's something I did. I kind of felt bad at the time, but I did it anyhow. Ooh, a little confessional here from Shane. I'm playing Eldrazi Displacer in a draft. For many turns, I use my Displacer effect
I like this one.
as a response to my opponent going in to declare attackers. I'm acting like it's a pre-combat tap ability, but it's really a blink that happens to tap. I even say, I'll blink tap that creature. One critical combat, he declares he's going to his attackers. I look over at my board and then say, go ahead, and make it look like I'm passing on my window to use my Displacer. My opponent assumes he's clear and declares all his attackers. I then blink tap and proceed to blow out his board after he tries to use a combat trick. My opponent calls a judge and says that I can't use my Displacer after attackers have been declared, and the judge looks at him like he has two heads and says, yes, you can. That's fine. I go on to easily win, but that's not hard with the Displacer on the board anyhow. Do I need to atone for my sins, or is that smart?
Nah, you're completely fine, Shane. Like, it's not on you to explain to your opponent exactly how every single thing works, and unless you are you said blink tap. You even said what it did. Like, there's nothing wrong here.
No, not at all. And you could have reasons for wanting to do it before combat. So yeah, there's nothing wrong there, Shane. You're good.
It's in the range, I think, of cunning Magic playing to do something wrong so your opponent doesn't know that you know how a card works or exactly how to use it correctly.
I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Definitely not, Grifter. That's genius. Nice
like
job.
if you attacked with Weaselback Redcap, let's say you were like, they had the poor judgment to play this card in a tournament, constructed or limited, and you mistap the pump ability, so that to leave up a combat trick, but make it look like you just tapped badly and your opponent now blocks and then use a combat trick. That's it's perfectly legitimate play.
It is. And that is those are subtle things that, aren't the fundamentals of how to get good at Magic, but they are things that matter at the highest levels occasionally.
Yeah. And they definitely, you can definitely get some edges there. It's actually one of the advantages of being not a well-known player. For example, if you're playing against Huey Jensen or Reed Duke or something, and they make what looks like an obvious misplay, you get suspicious.
Definitely.
If you're the player who they don't know and you're playing against them and you do that, they might just think, oh, this person's not good or they made a mistake. But when you play against someone skilled, they actually have less room to use these kind of bluffs. So what I'm trying to say is you're in the clear, Marshall.
Thank you, Luis. Good God, that's such a dagger. Joe is our next contributor here. Says, now the scenario I'll present actually happened. No, it's Joe.
It's Joe?
Yeah. And at least and it looks like Joe's from Brazil. So yeah, I actually have a recording of Paulo pronouncing this name for me on my phone. I asked him, I was in the booth at the Mythic Championship. This is a couple of Mythic Championships back, and somebody named Joe was doing really well. And I'm like, I do not know how to say this. So I just messaged Paulo because I'm like, hey man, can you just help me out? I don't know how to say this. So he wrote it back phonetically, but I'm like, can you just, I'm having a hard time still. So he just recorded his voice saying Joe, Joe into his phone. And I listened to it in the booth and then went on the air. So I probably still have it. Anyway, Joe says, now the scenario I present actually happened, and it sparked a lot of debate on the Brazilian MTG judges mailing list. It was a while ago, and you'll quickly realize due to the constant mention of the now banned cards. Now, this is one, by the way, that comes up somewhat often, and we've even had a version of it on the show already, but we'll do this one full on. So this is during a modern PTQ. Two players are engaged in a splinter twin mirror. One of them, we'll call him Jorge, cast Gitaxian probe and sees his opponent, Alice, let's say, is holding both Pestermite and Splinter Twin. She controls 4 lands. Jorge is dead to the combo unless his board does not interact with it and his hand contains just 2 lands. The draw off the Gitaxian probe doesn't help either. So Jorge tanks for a while and eventually calls a judge. As the judge approaches, he stands up and, as if meaning to ask a question out of earshot of Alice, doesn't really move very far away. Furthermore, he makes sure to speak loud enough for his voice to carry to Alice. Once the judge asks what's the question, he shows his hand, points to a land, and asks, hey, what's the right way to break up the twin combo with this? As the judge hesitates, somewhat dazed, Jorge remains silent, but as soon as it looks like he might just start talking, Jorge cuts him off and says, oh, I just remembered. Thanks, Judge, and moves back to the table and confidently passes the turn. Genius or Grifter? So Grifter. This is where people are trying to influence the player by involving other people. And I just don't like that. It's like, why does the judge need to be part of this? I mean, I understand in this scenario, but that shouldn't happen.
Don't if you're involving a judge, first of all, you're wasting their time. Second of all, I don't even I guess this is probably legal. I couldn't point to exactly what they did that's not legal, but I don't like it. I don't think it's a good way to play. So I think it's great.
Agreed. Also, it's a laughably bad bluff, right? If I'm Alice, I'm like,
what's the
you're
best way
asking a judge? That's not even a judge question. And also, if it's instant speed removal, there's only one way to break up the Splinter Twin combo. You can do it on their end step, or you can do it when they cast Splinter Twin. It's up to you, right? It's just,
this is just a bad, it's definitely, even if this wasn't Grifter, it would not be genius because this is not a particularly clever way of doing something. I get what
also,
you're going
if I was
for.
a judge, I'd be on full blown T. I'd be like, dude, do not waste my time with this nonsense. Yeah. I have a lot of responsibilities as a judge at a Magic tournament, and I don't need to be sitting here, being a pawn in your bluff.
Yeah, exactly.
This one comes from our friend Hallie, who says, it was in early 2016 and I was playing Bant Company in Standard. When I asked a friend for feedback on my play with the deck, he said my sequencing was good, but I had one tell that might end up hurting me. The deck played 2 Megamorph creatures, Den Protector and Stratus Dancer, and apparently I would always look at my graveyard after playing a Den Protector face down, making it obvious to observant opponents when I was playing each of the 2 cards. I asked my friend what I could do to hide or get rid of my tail, and he gave me 2 options. I could either stop looking at my graveyard altogether, or I could look at it and arrange it more often. I went with the latter, since getting into the habit of touching cards in my graveyard was easier than training myself to remember what was there without looking. A few weeks later, I made an attempt to hide my tail that would end up winning me a match. I was playing Bat Coco in a standard Grand Prix against an opponent on Grixis control. I had applied plenty of early pressure and was ahead on board, but was concerned about overextending into a board wipe. I decided to add a face-down Stratus Dancer to my board and make a point of looking at my graveyard after I put the card on the battlefield. My opponent must have assumed I had Den Protector. I had the ability to pay 1G or 1U for either Dancer or the Den Protector, because he cast Radiant Flames for 3, hoping to wipe my board. I Megamorph Stratus Dancer to counter the Radiant Flames and went on to win the game. Genius or Grifter?
I actually kind of like this one. It's
totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only is it fine, I think it's actually a little bit more clever than a lot of these. So I'm totally good with this. Like,
look at your graveyard. Love it. Yeah. Genius.
I mean, there's definitely nothing wrong with it. And, it's not even clear the opponent even paid attention or got fooled by it, because Hallie has no way of knowing what's in their head. So I think this is the kind of thing, like, if you want to try to feed your opponent a little disinformation, yeah, go for it. Nothing wrong with that.
Yep. This next one comes from Brock, who says, you bring multiple different decks to FNM for Modern Night. You haven't really decided which deck you'll play, and before you know it, pairings for round 1 are up. You see that you're paired against a player well known for always playing Lantern Control, so you bring out your burn deck when you sit down for the easy matchup.
God, don't do this. Come on. This is just horrendous.
Really bad.
This is what makes people not want to play Magic. Like, please do not do this to your opponents.
Yes, really bad.
I don't know that this is actively illegal because FNM is casual, but part of the reason it's casual is because you're not supposed to have to safeguard against people doing nonsense like this. So exactly. I greatly dislike this. This is definitely Grifter.
Yeah, the next one is too. This is also from Brock, who says, you're playing Dominaria draft at FNM. You're undefeated after 4 rounds and finish the second match in time to watch the other match at the top table. You watch a player with a strong green-black Sapperlings deck take it down, and you'll be playing that person in the finals. You bring in 3 copies of Radiant Lightning before the game starts.
Again, I believe technically legal, but I really greatly want to discourage this, and I believe it's Grifter. The Genius Grifter doesn't necessarily go by exactly the rules. And in this particular case, I think this is just really scummy to do.
All right, how about this one? You're not going to like this one at all, Luis. This one comes from Adam, who says, so he says, a well-known UK pro comment.
Hold on. Let me stop right there. Now that a well-known UK pro, is this going to be a positive or negative action by this so-called pro? Let's find out.
Let's find out together. So it's a limited GP in Paris. A well-known UK pro commented to their opponent that the sleeves they were using looked a little scuffed. Just a passing comment, and nothing more was said as they shuffled up and began the first game. Game 1 is drawing to a close, and it's not looking good for the UK pro, so he calls the judge over. Judge, these sleeves look like they might be marked. Could you check them, please? After the judge looks them over, he rules that while they could do with replacing, there was no discernible pattern that would give the player an advantage. The pro immediately concedes the game they were losing and moves on to the next game.
This is so
not
bad.
A good look for the pros, stuff like and this is horrible.
Look, I don't know. I clearly don't know who all the people are in all these hypotheticals, and I understand when they're like, "Oh yeah, this is a well-known player." My opinion is none of these people are pros. If you do this, you are not a professional player. You're a professional grifter. This is not how pros should act. So I get what you're saying. You're like, hey, if I name this person, would you think they're a pro? And it's like, sure, I understand who you're talking about. This person was a pro, but I think it's such a bad look and so antithetical to how I believe you should play that, this does not fit my definition of a pro. They're not being ambassadors. They're not being professional. They're really not winning the way I think you want to look. They're not looking for wins where you're supposed to be looking for wins.
By the way, Adam has more UK pros to throw under
Nice.
the bus here. He says the next story involves a UK national champion from a few years back. And then it puts in parentheses, is there something about UK Magic players that's just inherently dodgy? I hope not. I'm English myself. And I would say no, of course not, Adam. Prior to winning his Nationals title, this player had been playing a Howling Mine-based deck, maybe a Turbo Fog variant. The champ has a Howling Mine out, but his opponent kept forgetting to draw the extra card. Fortunately, this was largely being dealt with by reminders and warnings weren't going to lose the forgetful player a game loss. Then, the Howling Mine gets destroyed, preventing the need for the extra draws to be remembered. While passing the turn, the champ says, don't forget about the Howling Mine. Obligingly, the forgetful player starts her turn and draws 2 cards. The champ immediately calls for a judge and points out that their opponent has drawn an extra card. The penalty at the time was a game loss.
Well, the penalty for this
is just cheating.
No, the penalty for this wouldn't be a game loss. It'd be a DQ of the person saying, "Don't forget about Howling Mine." I have no doubt in my mind that look, things might be different in 2003 or whatever, but I have no doubt in my mind that if you did this at a tournament now, you would get DQ'd. If you said, "Don't forget about Howling Mine," and then they drew a card, and then you called the judge, you would get DQ'd.
Absolutely.
So
unbelievably Grifter.
Grifter.
That is just obscenely Grifter. I hope this player wasn't a pro. Mox Bagel says, just saw this at GP Vegas. Opponent has a counter-heavy control deck. Player in question is selectively holding up spells as if to say, is this okay? While others, he silently plays without making eye contact. I noticed he was mostly asking about spells he doesn't need much, but playing through threats, which weren't always obvious, but he changes it up enough that it seems intentional. Genius or Grifter?
I'm not 100% sure where to go here. I guess
this is just a weak attempt at being a Grifter.
Yeah, it's more Grifter than genius, but you can kind of, as long as you're clearly presenting spells to your opponent, you can kind of do it in whatever way you want. But yeah, I don't love this, obviously.
I don't either. What he's trying to do is get the opponent into the habit of setting a precedent over and over and then breaking the precedent the one time that it matters in an attempt to try to get them to be like, okay, and then, oops, it resolved or whatever. I will say, by the way, that the rules have, really morphed quite a bit over the past 6-7 years or so to be a lot more amenable to being on the bad end of this, where you're allowed to take stuff back a lot more, freely than you could before.
Yeah.
A couple more of these. Chris says, player A casts Vendilion Click at the end of player B's turn. Player B instinctively assumes they will target them before the click resolves. But upon revealing their hand, player A's intention was to target themselves. Player A has now seen player B's hand. Genius or Grifter? This is a design flaw with Vendilion Click, honestly.
Yeah, I don't love it.
Because people do this even if you have the best possible intentions. They'll just show you their hand. You're like, no, don't do that. I have not named a target. I haven't resolved this. There's a lot that happens with the click. I remember seeing Paul Rietzel in the feature match area at a Pro Tour once have this happen where he was like, stop. Don't show me that. I haven't decided yet what I'm doing with this thing.
Basically, whether it's genius or Grifter depends on your reaction to it, because it is fine to, it's not your fault if I'm playing against you and I go end of turn Vendilion Click and you just show me your hand. It's like, hold on. If my response is to scope it out, write down your hand and say, okay, I'll target myself, I'm being a Grifter. If my response is like, dude, Marshall, I haven't decided my targets, hold on, that's a completely different scenario. Mm-hmm. So
is it legal for me to show you my hand if I choose to do so?
Yeah, you can always show your opponent the hand.
And so the argument for the genius side would be, well, you decided to show me your hand. I happen to coincide with me casting this Vendilion Click, but I sure wouldn't have done that if I were you. Thanks for the info. I'll target myself.
I mean, it has gotten a little bit more strict where I think if you were to it's not plausible for you to pretend you didn't know what was happening. Right.
Right.
Right. Look, if you see the hand, it's not your fault. If you reveal your hand to me and I see it, it's not my fault that you did that, right? But if I don't tell you hey, don't do that, if I study it and then change my target, I don't like that. And you're not compelled to do this. Like, let's say I cast Vendilion Click end of turn. My intention was to target you, and you just flip over your hand of 2 lands in disgust. I'm like, dude, hold on. And then I'm like, okay, I guess I'll target myself. I think that's okay, because it's not my fault that you did that. And now I have this information. I don't think it's the most sporting. I think maximally sporting would be to say, like, well, I was going to target you, so I'm going to continue to do so. That's what I would like to see people do. But I understand that, like, not everyone is necessarily going to do that. I don't think it's deeply unethical not to. It is, however, to take advantage of that by just looking at their hand and being like, excellent, you know?
Steeple fingers.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Basically, like, what would be another unethical one would be for me to go, all right, on your draw step, I'll Vendilion Click. It hits the board and I look at you expectantly. Because then I'm like trying to induce you showing me.
Yes, for sure. And of course it is. And, you know, one of the takeaways that we've had here before too is, you know, just make sure that you understand how the things work and that you take it upon yourself to do the things where if the opponent looks at you, you go, what are you doing with your Vendilion Click, bud? Like, you're staring at me, but you haven't declared your target.
Exactly.
Right? Like, you want to be in that spot where
you
know
with the
what's
snarky
up.
Little bud, because at this point they're trying to get away with something.
Exactly. Okay, a couple more. Patrick says Guilds of Ravnica pre-release. In one of the early rounds of my day, I noticed my opponent saw my Is It deck box, and prior to game 1, started a sideboard. They had likely incorrectly assumed that I was in fact playing Is It. However, things got interesting when I switched deck boxes with my friend who was playing Boros. For the rest of the event, I sat down with a Boros box, then played an Is It deck. At least one other time, I noticed my opponent sideboarding prior to game 1, and I was left wondering if either I or my opponent were grifters.
Well, you're not a grifter because you didn't do anything. You just switched deck box because you wanted to leak less information. And if your opponent took advantage of that to pre-sideboard, which again, I think goes completely out of the spirit of open construction, like or continuous construction. The whole point of not submitting deck lists is because these events are supposed to be fun and casual, not so you can scout your opponents and pre-sideboard against them. Like, stop doing that.
Right.
You know, I think, Patrick, you're fighting fire in a really you're not even fighting fire with fire. You are judoing your opponent, where if they're on the level, there's nothing wrong happening. And if they're trying to get an unfair edge, they're the one who ends up posing themselves. So I love it. Yeah. You're a genius. Your opponents are grifters.
Totally. Last one comes from Michael, who says, hey guys, wasn't sure where this landed, but I figured I'd write in naming a target as you cast an Oblivion Ring as opposed to when it enters the battlefield. The idea being try to get the opponent to bounce the target to their hand or use some other resource, then naming a different target when the Oblivion Ring finally does enter the battlefield. That is Grifter.
Yeah, it's Grifter. It's not legal, actually. Like,
right.
You know, you can't be like, Oblivion Ring your Garruk, and they're like, okay, and they start to move your Garruk. They're like, oh, it resolves? In that case, I'll target your Nissa. It's like, no, that's not how it works.
Right. And it is tough because of the templating on the card leads to that kind of shortcut. Because the ideal would be Oblivion Ring, it resolves. Oblivion Ring enters the battlefield. Trigger goes on the stack. I'm going to target blank with the trigger, right? Like, but people are just, you know, you got to play faster than that. So you say Oblivion Ring, sure, target this, you know.
Well, I mean, the good thing is, by trying this, you are actually giving up an edge. Because when you say Oblivion Ring your Garruk in a feint, you're actually just locked into to Oblivion Ring and Garruk. And then your opponent has full information and can decide whether to counter it or not.
That's right.
Yeah. So I actually kind of love it in that you're trying to be a grifter and you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yes. So yes, that is the ideal grifter, the one that doesn't work. Yes. All right. So that was fun, Luis. Boy, our listeners really bring the heat, man. The cat litter box one was just unreal.
That's just chef's kiss.
Yeah. Chef's kiss indeed. That is going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for coming along. We really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us every week, even if we do ratchet up the nonsense occasionally on the show. We got to have fun too, right? If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. I want to remind you about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. If you want to sell your cards, that is the place to go. 40% trade-in bonus for store credit on the cards that you sell back. That is awesome stuff. Top of the industry. It is where you want to go. You can go to channelfireball.com/buy list to check out the prices there and get those cards sold. And of course, you can also just get cash still. Like if you just need money, you can do that too. Yeah, that is an option.
I mean, I also want to to, let people know that with the advent of Pioneer, prices have fluctuated on a lot of on a lot of cards. In fact, as soon as it got announced, our massive stock of Siege Rhinos got bought out immediately. So shrug.
Oh, but, really? Yeah.
Well, my point for listeners is Pioneer is using Return to Ravnica 4. There's a lot of cards in there that probably are worth more now than you think they are, because their prices may have changed. So now's a perfect time to sell us some cards. We're buying.
That's right. So go check out your old binder or pile of cards.
Your Dictum Times, your Smuggler's Copters, your Deathrite Shamans, all that sort of stuff.
Yep, back in action. So make sure you check that out. Again, channelfireball.com/buy list to do that. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So since we had a show of all sign-offs, I'm actually going to put strategy here. I hate to disappoint. Oh. And someone actually had an interesting suggestion, which is, hey, what do you guys think about doing a constructed resources episode every now and then? This will be an impromptu mini constructed resources episode, because I have been playing quite a bit of standard in preparation for this weekend. I'm playing the MCQ. If I do well, top 16 out of 2,500 or whatever people get to qualify for the last Arena Mythic Championship this year. I figured I'd weigh in on kind of where I see standard being right now, because I've been practicing and tuning for that. I believe you're making a grievous mistake if you don't play Gilded Goose and Oko in your deck. And there are some decisions to make past that, but where I would start right now, definitely Gilded Goose, Oko, Paradise Druid, Nissa, and Wicked Wolf. I think that, and Once Upon a Time. I think that you want all of those cards. And the cards I consider flex slots are Questing Beast. I don't think it's right to play 4 anymore, because Field of the Dead and Golos are gone. I recommend 2 Questing Beasts. I recommend not playing 4 Hydroid Krasis, which seems, a little controversial, but, looking at the Arena Mythic Championship that just happened, Chris Kavartek played 0 Hydroid Krasis in a more aggressive blue-green deck. And Hydroid Krasis is at its best once you've untapped with Nissa. Well, the games where you untap with Nissa, you usually win. I don't think you need too many cards that maximize that position. That said, I still think it's correct to play Hydroid Krasis, but I'm experimenting between playing 2 to 3 Hydroid Krasis. There's a couple ways you can go. One is to play straight blue-green, but I actually think that you want to splash either black or white. And the reason is, the mana base hit is you have to play some Fabled Passages, you have to play one of the basics of the off-color, and you have to play 8 additional dual lands, whether, Hallowed Fountain, Temple Garden, or a Watergrave Overgrown Tomb. The reason I don't think that's bad is I think aggro is at an all-time low, because aggro is so poor against the blue-green decks in general. So you're not getting punished for the shock lands. It's really, can you afford the half come into play tap lands of Fabled Passage? I think you can, because the card quality upgrade is significant. I would recommend against playing Brazen Borrower. I do not think that is a very good card. I think main decking Noxious Grasp is totally acceptable. I'm considering doing so myself. That'd be the black version, where you basically play 3 to 4 Noxious Grasp in the main deck, plus some combination of 4 mana Vraska and 6 mana Garruk. And then there's the white version, which is more like the Bant food deck that Mengucci and a couple other folks played, which plays Teferi Time Raveler and Deputy of Detention in those slots. One of the appealing things about the white is Once Upon a Time plus Deputy is a pretty nice combo. Basically, adding creature-based removal to your deck makes Once Upon a Time even better. And, that card is very good already. So the last thing I would suggest looking at is Voracious Hydra. I've been experimenting with 1 to 2 of those in the main deck, just because it's a decent play on like 3 to 4 mana, and it just scales up over the game and is good at bringing you back when you're behind. It's one of the ways you can fight against another blue-green deck that's kind of gotten out ahead of you. You can Voracious Hydra their Goose or something on 4 mana. So
are we going to see any control decks come back now that Field of the Dead's gone? Yeah,
you will see more. Certainly played against Esper and Grixis control decks. I think those decks are still not good enough. I don't think you should play them. I do think that if you play a Simic deck or a Simic-based deck, especially if you look at some of the changes that I've just suggested, you need to have a good sideboard against control, because playing main deck Noxious Grasp or Deputy Detention is just not good against those decks. Those are actively bad against control. That said, you have access to cards like Duress, Negate, Disdainful Stroke, Tameo, the Moon Sage. No, not Tameo the Moon Sage. Tameo what is the 4-mana Tameo called? I don't even know.
Collector of Tales.
Yes, that one. Tameo Collector of Tales, I think, is a very good sideboard against control. It's exactly what you want because she's a cheap planeswalker. She stops discard effects and sacrifice effects like edicts, and she just immediately gets you card advantage, which is just the way you want to fight against the control deck that's going to be full of removal spells.
Mm-hmm.
And, my biggest concern with these decks is Rotting Regisaur. So I think you want to pack some answers. The white version is much better set up because Teferi and Deputy are both decent against Regisaur. The black version, I think, wants to play maybe like Assassin's Trophy or something like that, just because Regisaur is a pretty annoying card. It's just so much bigger than all the stuff you've got.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, that's my recommendation if you're playing this weekend. Play a Simic base, splash either black or white, and you can cut down on questing beasts and even trim a Krasis or two.
All right, you going to be tweeting your results? I know everybody wants to root for you to get back in there.
Yeah, if I do well. If you don't hear anything, it's because I just did badly.
Okay.
But if I do well, I'll let people know. I mean, the run could end really soon. It's like, I think day one is you play to either 2 losses or like 10 wins. So
Yes.
if I just go
extremely unforgiving environment.
right, yes. If I just go 3-2, I'm just done. So it's not. It might not last very long. But if I figured I'd let people know and raise the constructed resources banner once again.
All right. Well, good luck.
Thank you.